This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
The single father with 2 children is terrified and stalked by an oppressive fear of death, which leads to rock bottom, loneliness, and bankruptcy. Despite his best efforts, arguments, and logic, he cannot keep up with the competition. Fearlessly embracing the new way forward, he opens his heart and reaches out for a lifeline. With sincerity and earnestness, John David Latta shares his extraordinary stories of what happened when he gave himself to unconditional love. As he tells his story, he inspires, uplifts, heals, shocks, awakens, and transforms. The seeds of potential hold the key to changing your habits, beliefs, and deepest assumptions about what is possible, and have the power to completely change the way you live. Valeria interviews John David Latta. He is the author of The Synchronicity of Love, Stories that Heal, Transform, and Awaken. John David Latta is also a mystic, teacher, and former founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar consumer products company. He shares intimate and personal stories and teaches workshops on leadership, healing, transformation, awakening, love, synchronicity, and wisdom that unite and expand human experience. He lives with his wife, Wendy, in Redmond, Washington. Meet John at johndavidlatta.com. Here's the interview with John David Latta. In your own words, who is John David Latta?
That's a great question. How much time do you have, Valeria?
Right.
Is it Valeria? Am I pronouncing your name right?
Yes.
Valeria?
Yes.
Let's see. I'm a guy. I'm 64 years old. I'm living in Redmond, Washington, just outside of Seattle. In a nutshell, I wasn't probably, very competitive, very logical, very rational, very much operated around clock time for the first half of my life. And I think I've been learning and integrating all of the opposites of that ever since. I'm learning to slow down, learning to appreciate timelessness, learning to appreciate a sense of feeling in everything that I do. It's funny, I shared with my wife this morning a dream I had where I was playing basketball, but we were playing with what looked like tiny little beach balls, and they were very light. And I was like, boy, this game doesn't work unless you have a lot of subtlety and sensitivity. And so yes. I think that's been my journey as well, is into what I would call greater and greater subtlety and sensitivity. I'm an author and a teacher, and I would say about 20 years ago, what I would call the realm of dream and vision opened up to me, and I get a lot of, I cherish my dreams, visions, and voices that speak to me. I absolutely cherish that part of my life right now.
Wow. That all sounds so wonderful to me. And I have to ask you this question. How did you become the John that I'm speaking with today? How did you uncover him?
Yeah, it's easy. Like everybody else, I had to go through a lot of pain first.
Yes, that's a big one.
So, and that was really my book, The Synchronicity of Love. And that really is where the book begins, is when my very one-sided but kind of charmed life ended and a whole new life began. And it ended with divorce, starting my own company, losing all my money, suddenly finding myself a dad with custody of my two young children, ages 9 and 11. And so I was kind of mom and dad at the same time. And then underneath it all, I had this terrifying fear of death that was stalking me everywhere. And since I'd been so logical and rational and hadn't really paid much attention growing up to, Catholic church tradition that I grew up in, I didn't really have a foundation to fall back on about what happens when you die. And so I was afraid to even talk to anybody about it. So, yeah, and without knowing it, I was going through a gigantic spiritual transformation. And I would have thought I was the last person on earth to go through something like that.
Wow. So when I asked that question, you mentioned suffering has been, I say, of course, almost like not in a, I wish I didn't say that, but yeah, of course, there was also the catalyst for me becoming open up to my heart and becoming softer in a way. So how do you make sense of suffering in the sense of, do we come here with all these lessons to learn and we have to go through suffering? Or there's more to it, John?
I don't think we have to go through suffering. There is an old saying that pain is probably inevitable, but suffering is a choice. And of course, I didn't know that at the time. But I do think we incarnate with certain lessons that we want to learn, certain experiences that we want to have. And certainly sometimes they're very difficult and very painful. But for whatever reason, um, some of that pain, some of that suffering, some people are able to move through it fairly quickly. It's not like they don't experience it, they still feel it. And in my experience and my understanding, what you would call an old soul, somebody that's had many, 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 many lifetimes, is able to move through the pain and suffering quicker. Not that it's a race, because it isn't. But it's amazing to me how some people can experience a little bit of pain and it just stays with them the rest of their life. And other people can experience a lot of pain and who knows, it could be a day, a month, a year, 10 years later, they've moved through it and they've moved on. And so, but there's no doubt that pain and suffering are the basis for my and probably most people's transformation. In fact, I wrote a chapter in my book, a couple of chapters about this, because I was devoutly anti-spiritual, anti-religious for so many years. And I used to say, "Oh, people don't change." And
Yes.
boy, was I wrong about that. And
Yes.
let's see, I kind of lost my train of thought there.
Oh, yeah, in
There
your
was,
book, you said in your book that you wrote something.
yeah. So what was going on with me at that time in my life was that I was reading a book that I really liked by Michael Crichton, who's a really world famous author. It's written, I don't know, 10 or 20 best-selling books made into TV and movie. Um, and let's see, what I wanted to say was I was reading his book, and in his book were a lot of spiritual experiences he'd had, and I was very intrigued by those, although I would never admit that to anybody else. So on some level, I think I already knew it's time for me to, like what you said, open my heart, open my mind. I didn't realize how many walls I'd kind of built around my belief system. And I don't think I had to go through pain and suffering. Uh, but I did at that stage in my life. But if I were really following my muse, so to speak, following my heart, I probably would have signed up for a spiritual workshop and gone and sat with some teachers. But my ego was so entrenched and so proud that I didn't. So I think that's what I want to tell people is, there are so many stories of people that, they get cancer and suddenly they make radical life changes they wanted to make all along, but were afraid to. And then their life is better, different, happier, and the cancer goes away. And so I think I want to encourage people, just like you and I talked about a little bit off the air, it's good to follow your heart. It's good to follow your intuition. It's good to see where it leads you. Because if you don't, I think sometimes life is going to deliver you something really hard and really painful, and it's going to force you to make the change.
Yes. Anyway, so true. It has been my experience too. You mentioned Something came to me. So reincarnation, this idea that mind continuation was something that remains, some imprints of this lifetime will remain, and then we come back. Is that a choice? Are we making this choice to come back and go through all this suffering again in order to learn something? And that's one question. And then what would freedom look like, John?
Ha! You asked the best questions. So yes, I do believe it's a choice from the start. But my understanding is the souls that incarnate on Earth today are coming from all over the cosmos. And so if you've heard the term starseed or
Yes.
light worker, these tend to be what we call older souls that have had other embodied existences in other places throughout the cosmos, not just human being, not just here on Earth. And so, yes, there was a choice that we made. My understanding today, Earth is going through this huge ascension process. So you might say old souls from all over the cosmos are incarnating as human beings to help raise the vibration of the planet. But it's not easy taking a high vibing old soul being and plopping him into,
Yeah.
density in a human body. And so
Yes.
sometimes I think, again, this is just my understanding, we get trapped in karma. And, we come in to learn lessons and we kind of screw things up, and we more or less have to come back, and we have to come back again and again. So that's my understanding. Yes, absolutely a choice at the beginning, but the way karma works on this planet, I think once we start, we might have to just see it through to the very end, and that might take many lifetimes. And I can't tell you what that number is, 1 or 5 or 10 or 100. And so what's freedom? True freedom? I think true freedom is just surrender in every single moment. Surrender, even when you're in pain, even when you're suffering. Um, it might look like not resisting things that we ordinarily would resist. So I do think freedom is available to us in every single moment, but we just forget it.
Wow, I love that answer.
Yeah.
Yes, it resonates true to me. And then what I wonder is if all of us, not just embodied ones, but also the ones without body in different dimensions or
Mhm.
cosmos. I wonder if we had this understanding, perhaps we wouldn't have to keep coming back here to help one another, that because we would realize that there's just God, there's just source, there's
Yeah.
just one reality, not two.
Yeah.
Maybe because we keep kind of this, we're just so identified with this duality, the idea of the other, of something else other than God. I use the word God just as because I used to have a lot of, it was loaded for me because I came from religious background, but now
Mhm.
I'm a lot more free when it comes to that too. So I use the word God
Right.
as in unconditional love, the same as unconditional love or pure
Yeah.
consciousness, the infinite. So yeah, I really believe that, John, that if when we come to that understanding, that deeper understanding, without any doubts, then we wouldn't have to come back here, none of us to
Yeah.
this reality. Or it wouldn't become physical anymore because there's no need for it.
I do think that, there's a woman, I'm trying to think of her name, Judith Orloff, and she's written a bunch of books, and she talked about her mother was a very wealthy, her mother and father both were wealthy doctors, physicians, socialites living in Beverly Hills in California, and they loved being socialites. And when her mother passed away, she came back and spoke to her a few times and was
Yeah.
just like, I miss being a socialite. I miss being a human being. And so,
Ah,
for all the pain and
mm,
suffering we have,
mm,
there are experiences that we have as a human being that are also beautiful and amazing, and we can't have when we're not embodied. And
mm,
so,
mm.
I got to believe there's a little bit of, I think there are some people like, I had a good time. I want to go back. So,
Yes, right. I have heard that too. Some of my guests years back that not these days for some reason, but yeah, I used to hear that. For some reason, that changed, evolved where it's not to disown this reality, the relative reality, but there's something about the absolute reality that it's what attracts me the most these days. Yeah, because it would break my heart not to be compassionate. I could never not be that way. So it has to be integrated, of course. But yeah, I can't help it but just think about the idea of coming back here and this being fun. I guess ignorance is fun in a sense of ignoring what is true, right? The true,
Yeah.
the absolute. It's fun. Yeah, we
Yeah.
can get taste, in all that dance. But I don't know. I don't know if I would want to experience that without the suffering that it comes with.
Yeah.
So do you want to make a comment about that?
Yeah. Well,
About-
this is my understanding, and there are some authors that have written books on this. But and this is a general rule, of course, that when we incarnate as a human being, we have to move through multiple levels of consciousness, of which, by the way, compassion and unconditional love are probably two of the highest. And but and as a human being, we'll experience both the highs and lows, but there's still sort of a settling point where we find ourselves most of the time. And so I'm going to give you an example of, and there are many what they call maps of consciousness, but to incarnate as a human being means moving through the lowest levels and up to the higher levels, and then you're done. And one way to look at two of the lowest levels, and you will see this pain all around on the planet Earth today, the first one is what they call the tribal level, where you're not even really identifying as an individual. You identify with your family or your church or your sports team or your city, and it's and then and that's really kind of the beginning. And then the next level up is you start to break away from your tribe. So it might be like, maybe you were very involved in a particular church and you suddenly feel like this doesn't fit for me anymore. And you want to break away from that. And how that manifests sometimes is people turn around and try to manipulate the people in the tribe. And so you can see this all around the world today. There are a lot of, and I don't mean this in a bad way, there's a lot of sheep. And there's a lot of wealthy, powerful, influential people in media that manipulate the sheep. And that's not I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying these are the two most common levels of consciousness on Earth today. And then you might say we move through increasingly more and more positive levels as we go through all the experiences we have and all the lifetimes we have, until we start to feel like all we really want to do and be is compassion and unconditional love. But even that isn't the last step. The last step is hard to even, it's something I don't think you can even put into words, but it's probably what feels like oneness, unity, and it's a difficult thing to put into words. So if what is calling you and what draws you is compassion and unconditional love, and it feels like it's something that flows through you naturally and easily, you're probably an old soul, and you've probably done this many, many, many times. And this is probably for the rest of your life, how you give back. Because I think we incarnate with karma, but I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that we came in to learn a lesson. And then the old souls, you might say, in the second half of their life, move from, I think they call it karma to dharma, and they move into service and they want to give back. And even this podcast that you host right now might be an example of that.
Yes, it feels that way, right? It's
Yeah.
a calling from the soul, right? Because I always felt like having this deep connection with human beings, but I was not able to do it within my family and all, and I had to just kind of step away from all of that. That's a fascinating journey, right, John, when we think about it from that big picture.
Yeah.
Going through all these stages and learning. And I guess I'm just very interested in freedom. Like what is freedom? That unity. I want to get there. I got to be careful just wanting too much, I guess. This is a longing thing. So it's all about trying to experience that within this life still, with the body. I don't know. I have heard that's possible. I'm a student of Advaita Vedanta, non-duality. So it's very much possible according to them. So
yeah, I don't think you would be drawn to love, compassion, and Advaita Vedanta and non-duality
Yeah.
I think the average person could care less about that. So,
Oh my God. Tell me about it. I had so many people just turn their eyes, kind of
yeah,
roll their eyes and just kind of not. My husband, he's funny. Well, I find it funny, but it's the truth is not really, because deep inside, I wish everyone would be open to it, to find their own nature, to kind of return to it, really, to our own
I walked
limitless.
into a Advaita Vedanta temple in the hills above Santa Barbara one time, and most people don't know it's there, and it's just set amongst these beautiful oak trees with a view of the ocean, the difference. And I walked in,
Yeah.
and it was so peaceful in
Uh,
there.
I can imagine. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah, that's the
yeah,
experience I have, yeah,
yeah,
around those monks. So your book, I forgot to mention earlier, you did, but I didn't. Though the
yeah,
Synchronicity of Love,
yeah.
stories that heal, transform, and awaken. But you also
Hmm.
have a new book coming up, right, John? Something
Right.
True, which was inspired by the sacred circles that you host. So talk to me about all that.
So for over, gosh, I'm trying to think how long it's been. It's been about a decade. I've been hosting circles in my home that I call Something True. And I used to do men's work. I think I did it for almost 10 years. And it's kind of an offshoot of that. And what we would do is get, I'd say approximately 20 people. I've had as many as 40 and as few as maybe 15, but probably 20 to 25 is the average size. We sit in a circle. We introduce ourselves, and I create a space of in the heart center of unconditional love, and very important to kind of create that space. And then we go around one or two or three rounds, and we have people just check in. And it would be, tell us what's going on in your life right now. And if it's horrible and you want to share it, great. If it's wonderful and you want to share it, great. All I ask is that it be true for you. Take your mask off, be authentic, be honest. If life is terrible right now, be honest about it. If life is wonderful, be honest about it. And so, in a way, it's probably a little bit of offshoot of my Catholic upbringing. In a way, it's like a confession, but it's also teaching people two things: how to speak honestly and authentically from their heart. It's so common to want to wear a mask out in the world and feel like you have to. I think a lot of people don't even know what it feels like to be in touch with their authentic self. And two, trying to teach people to just listen with love and compassion and not try and save the other person or fix them or tell them they're wrong or criticize them or
Yes,
change their point of view.
yes.
And so, yeah, it's a really beautiful thing. And I think I've hosted, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 of them probably over the last decade.
Yes, it really sounds like it when I read about it. Like, oh my
Yeah.
God, I wish you're close to me. I'll be there for sure. That sounds like fun,
Yeah.
connecting in a deeper way. So, do you find it to be healing? So, I guess the question is, what's healing to you? And what are the obstacles to healing, John?
Okay, I'm going to tell you this is just my personal opinion on what healing is. So here's what happens in life. Something happens, and I'm going to use, and I think almost everybody to some degree has experienced abuse, abandonment, violence, to some degree, something terrible. And but I like to use kind of a silly example. If you're 4 years old and you walk down the street and a big black dog attacks you, and maybe disfigures you a little bit, or bites your hand terribly, or end up in the hospital, it's possible that you might spend the rest of your life afraid of dogs or afraid of big black dogs. You might turn you into a cat person.
Right,
You might create a
right.
Facebook
Yeah.
page that's
Yes.
anti-dog and that everybody needs to lock up their dogs. And
Yes.
so,
Huh.
and this is kind of how the human journey works, is little things happen to us along the way that we tend to go whatever the opposite of that is and takes us down a path. And so what healing is bringing in the other side later in life. And so the other side might be later in life when you are hopefully, a little older, more mature and wiser. You might look around and go, there's a lot of people that have dogs, and that they have little kids, and the dogs lick the little kids' faces and they're not afraid of dogs. Why am I the only person terrified of dogs? And so healing is, instead of going down path of limitation, which would be dogs are horrible, dogs are evil, dogs can't be trusted, Now it's like, well, that's actually not true. A lot of dogs are lovely and, man's best friend, and they're not vicious. And so that's how I see healing. And that can apply to anything. If you were molested or abused or abandoned and it took you down a path of, and then later it's like, okay, now I'm going to open, maybe I wasn't abandoned. Maybe I don't have to see my life that way. Maybe I was molested, but I'm not being molested anymore. And so that it's a hard thing to put into words, but what I would call the wound, the pain, the trauma, the suffering takes you down one path. The healing is opening to the other path, the path that's not taken. And so, and moving into what I would call wholeness then.
Mm. Yes, that really resonates with me, right? But that takes being open, isn't it? I find that some people, or perhaps even parts of us, are not ready yet, kind of let themselves go or be seen. Well, I'm around a lot of psychologists too, and then they talk a lot about the mind and how it works. And also Vedanta, the way they explained, there's the realm of the mind, and then there is pure consciousness. And consciousness is different than the mind. So I try to focus more on consciousness than mind, but I know that we are being formed by the mind. We are just driven by it, its content all the time, consciously or unconsciously. So I prefer the idea of becoming conscious of what is unconscious, but it's not an easy work to do. From my own experience, has been a very interesting experience, actually. Not easy, but interesting.
I know, I totally agree with you. In fact, the newest book that I'm working on now is called Cleaning Up the Consciousness of Man.
Oh, I love that.
And,
yeah, we need it.
I don't know if you remember, his name was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
Yes.
He was kind of like the yogi to the Beatles. And
yes.
he has this wonderful quote. You can look it up online. I'm not going to get it exactly right. He would say, fulfillment is structured in action. Action is structured in knowledge, but knowledge is structured in consciousness. And so, like, psychologists talk a lot about the mind, but if you want to know what's behind the mind, it's consciousness. And if you want to change anything in the world, it actually begins with changing consciousness. And you're right, it's a difficult thing because most of us, most of the time, are asleep. Most of us, most of the time, are not conscious. But I think that's what's going on the planet right now is we're all waking up. A lot of people who are very conscious are waking up. And there's more and more consciousness on the planet. And I think that that's why no matter how much pain and suffering is out there, statistically speaking, in so many ways, the world's getting better. And I think it's because consciousness is rising, growing, and expanding. And it might be like it's happening way too dang slow, but it is happening.
Yes, I feel that way too. It's almost like it's a time where consciousness wants to return to itself. It's kind of, right, trying to find itself. Because it has been hypnotized and identified with objects, with the experience, and have lost itself. But the interesting thing is that everything is consciousness, or everything is in consciousness.
Yeah.
So how amazing that we actually become very unaware of that. And of course, for me, has been like this incredible experience, it is still an experience. And that's why we can't really describe what it's like to see the pure self, because it's undescribable. It's not a thing, right? We can't describe it because it's not an object. It's not an object of experience. So the mind doesn't know what to do with it. But we know it's here and we can feel it. Yeah. So talk to me about making peace with death. That caught my attention too. I know you mentioned earlier briefly.
So I had mentioned just when everything in my life was about to totally fall apart, was beginning to fall apart, suddenly I found myself terrified of death. And I kind of associated me with my body and mind. And I thought, well, when the body and mind go, then I go, and that's it, over forever. And that sense of forever and oblivion was terrifying to me. So a few years goes by, and I join a year-round spiritual study group It was led by Dr. William Brew Joy, and he just basically taught unconditional love in the Heart Center over and over and over again. That's what he taught. And so it was 11 months into that program in the month of November. And he goes, for the month of November, we're going to greet and embrace the mystery of death. And instead of running away from it like most people do or ignoring it, we're going to run towards it. And he goes, I want you to meditate on death. I want you to pray on death. I want you to read books on death. I want you to listen to music on death. Do the very thing that most people don't do and run towards it. And so I did. And right out of the gate, I had like profound meditations. And I was like, okay, bring it on. I'm not going to run away from this thing I'm afraid of. I'm going to turn around and face it. And the first profound meditation was, a woman shows up in my meditation and says, before you know about death, first you need to know about life. And so I get taken to this beautiful home, and inside I see the strangest scene. I see Jesus and Hercules, and they are like Siamese twins, or I guess they call them conjoined twins now. They're connected from the waist down, and Hercules is all muscle and sweat, and he's struggling and he's struggling, and Jesus is just this perfectly vertical pillar, like he's not moving at all. And suddenly Hercules turns around and realizes he's connected to Jesus, and they embrace each other as brothers. And so I think what I was looking at is kind of what feels like the duality between our divinity, you might call it our soul, and our human self, the body mind. And so it's like, okay, that was cool. Next day I go into meditation. It's like, okay, I want to learn more about death. And it's like, okay, now we're going to teach you about death. Okay, so hang on. I have a lot of rich dreams. So here's what happened. It feels like October. It's dark out. There's a full moon on the horizon, and I'm walking through what feels like a farmer's field, and he's already harvested everything for the year. So the field everything's been harvested. But in front of me is this really terrifying scarecrow, and he looks like, instead of it looked like an actual human being up on a post, and it was rotting and decaying. So it looked like a real half-decayed human being skeleton up there. Scary looking, and it was like 10 feet tall, and it was just daring me to come towards it. But I did. And as soon as I walked past it, the moon, which was low on the horizon, came towards me, and we fused and became one. And we flowed as a river of liquid mercury. If you've ever seen what mercury looks like in liquid, it's got a really strange sort of quality. We ran across the edge of the earth, and as if the earth were flat, it dripped off into deepest, darkest space, and there was just infinite nothingness for a very long time. And then all of a sudden, poof, I'm transformed into this. If you've seen groups of skydivers when they jump from a plane and they hold each other by their wrists and ankles like a big human chain, what I saw was this huge golden grid made of light, beautiful geometry all around planet Earth. And it was made both of light and people. And it was like millions of people in this, like skydivers holding each other by ankles and wrists in this beautiful grid made of light. And it was the strangest thing. I was both an individual, part of the chain of people, but I was also a collective. I was just part of a whole. You might say I was just light. I was just part of the light. So I was both an individual and kind of one with all these other people. And the weird thing is, I could hear people on Earth speaking, asking questions, sending out prayers. So it was almost, I felt like I was this source of, you might call it the self, the source of wisdom. And I was answering people's questions, both individually and collectively. And so what I understood about that is, even when the body goes away, there's still an essence of me that exists and goes on, and it's connected to some greater field of light, you might say. And so I read a bunch of books, and there's a jillion videos on YouTube about near-death experiences. And all I know, by the end of the month, I have not had 1 ounce of fear about death ever again. It's just gone. And I tell people all the time, they tell people all the time, face your fears. And it's like, wow,
Mhm.
it really worked for me.
Yes, yes.
So
Wow.
yeah, I think
That's
sometimes if you're ready and you're really terrified of something, to turn around and face it is the only way you can move through it.
it's true. Yes.
Yeah.
It has been my experience too,
Yeah.
at different levels, right?
Yeah.
I love that because it makes me think about the teachings of Vedanta again, that
Yeah.
what we call me, the I, it's God, it's actually God. So every
Yeah.
time we say, I do this and I did, that's all God
Yeah.
speaking. And I know a lot of people, they're afraid of that even, to say, I am God. Most people, they run from, they would just, I have said that to some people here and my family members too. I had all kinds of different, some of them just kind of left the room and just walked away. Terrified, terrified. I am God? No, it can't be.
I have to tell you a funny story. So
Yes.
I appreciate you sharing that with me,
Yeah.
because for 20 years, I think one of my lessons has been learning to listen to my intuition and when to say something to people and when to shut up.
Yeah, right.
And I've got a
Oh,
good friend
yeah.
named Ann Tucker, who's a trance channel, and she channels the angelic realm. And but she came from the corporate world, hardworking business person, very left brain, masculine. And then she also went through this gigantic transformation. She goes, I looked around one day and realized I didn't have any friends. And she goes,
Yes.
I tried to reach out to all my old friends and none of them got back to me. And so,
Right,
and
right.
so
Yeah.
she went to a meetup group where she did a talk, and she talked about what she was doing now. And she was a completely different person. And the people that meetup group didn't know her. And everything in her life changed after that. In fact, she said her best friends today are still a lot of those people that were at that first meetup group meeting. And so the thing you're describing is a really difficult but very common thing, where people come in, they incarnate as a human being, they're essentially asleep, they're not awake, and they go about living their karma, painful, suffering, blah blah blah. And then somewhere along the line, could be in their 20s, could be in their 60s, they wake up and it's different, and they're a different person. And that's one of the more painful parts of transformation, is a lot of the things you like to do, your old hobbies, your old friends, they go away. And I remember Ram Dass saying, it was really funny. He said, he goes, one day you look around and, and all your friends still want to go bowling and you don't want to go bowling anymore.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, we lose. It's a different perception. We see
Yeah.
this reality very different. I guess, how do you integrate that? I guess that was one of the guided questions that it caught my attention. How do you navigate the spiritual transformation while living an everyday life? That was the guided suggested
Yeah.
topic, actually.
And that's great, because that's really what my life has been about. I mean, there was no running to the monastery or the woods or the ashram or anything. It was like,
Right,
I
right.
went through,
Yeah.
you might be familiar with this a little bit, but I went through a whole Kundalini awakening, and I
Yes,
didn't even know
yes.
what the word meant. And boy, my life got really crazy then. And yet
Yes.
I still got little kids that I'm coaching their ball
Ah,
teams, and
ah.
hey, do you have homework, and packing their lunches.
Yes,
It
wow.
was surreal. Like, I remember coming home from work early and just taking a nap and having these profound visions with goddesses. And I was like, oh my God. And then the doorbell rings. Okay, mommy or daddy, I just got off the school bus.
Yes.
And so, how do you navigate it? Oh
Yeah.
man, it was with great difficulty. Now, when I look back, I made it more difficult than it had to be. And I think because I was so rigidly rational for so long, I was having a lot of what seemed like transrational experiences, and frankly, they scared me. They were exciting because I liked what I was going through, but I kept being afraid. And I owned my own company, and it was a multi-million-dollar company, and I got my two little kids, and I was afraid I was going to not be able to function in the world. But what, now looking back, whatever it is that suddenly comes through and transforms you, it has a wisdom of its own. And that's what I try to tell people is, it may push you to the brink, but it won't push you over the edge. And there were times that I had to say whatever it was, like, no energy and no dreams tonight. I need to sleep.
Yes.
Please leave me alone.
Yeah.
And it would for a day or two. And then it would come back when I felt more rested. Okay, we're not
Yeah.
done yet, John.
Yeah. Oh my
And so
God.
I had a lovely experience. I felt so grateful early on in the journey. I walked into a spiritual bookstore and bought a couple of books by an author I liked. And as I was paying for the books, the lady says, "Oh, these are great books. Would you like him to sign them?" And I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" And she goes, "The author, he's here." And I look around and there's this short, kind of grandfatherly looking man, and his name is David Spangler. And he just had got done teaching a workshop, and she goes, "David, come on up here." And so one of the books I bought was called Parent as Mystic, Mystic as Parent. And David had been a spiritual teacher his whole life. Unbeknownst to me, he lived only 20 minutes away from me. And he was married and had 4 kids. So he knew all about what I was going through. And so I was so grateful. It's like, okay, I can do this. And so I want to say to all of you out there that are going through some kind of big transformation, and it's difficult at work, with friends, maybe church you are part of or anything, just hang in there. On some deep level, I believe you're being supported, and it might be painful. But everybody goes through that. I remember having employees that would say, "I'm going to quit drinking," or "I'm going to quit smoking weed." And they did, but then they realized that all of their life and their friendships had been built up around drinking and getting high. And when they couldn't do that anymore, then came the real painful part. They were going to have to find new friends. So it's not just people on a spiritual journey. I think anybody that's going through some kind of deep transformation or change experiences that pain.
That's true. That's interesting that you actually call it pain,
Yeah.
because it is. Yeah, I'm trying to think about that now.
Maybe loneliness is a better word.
Yes, I
Yeah.
felt that way. Right.
Yeah.
No one else to share
Yeah.
discoveries, the uncoverings, and
Yeah.
then I start talking to anyone, and they are not ready to hear those things. So now I know not to do that anymore. But I think I still do it. I
Oh,
think I still do it. Some people around me. I can't help it, John. But that's why I host this podcast. I can't really
yeah.
have small conversations. So
I hear you, but I'm sure you're figuring it out. And believe me,
yes,
I've got a big mouth, so I got myself in trouble more times than I care to admit. But
I can imagine.
I think, if you're quiet and still, your intuition will tell you this is something you can share with somebody, and it's going to land for them, and they're going to hear it. Dougal Fraser is a famous psychic, and he was teaching once that, psychics read the other person, but the other person frequently has big walls built up around them. And so a psychic will sometimes try and do whatever they can to get the other person to kind of warm up and open up a little bit, because the psychic can read them a lot better that way.
Yes.
And so he would teach people that want to be a psychic or want to be intuitive. The very first thing you should do is check in with your intuition and ask, is this a person that's going to be able to hear what I have to say? And so I applaud you doing your podcast in any way that you want to teach or get the world, the message out. But just trust that the right people are going to come to your show. And the people that aren't meant to get what you have to share, your intuition will tell you, don't talk to this person, or maybe just share a little bit, just a little tidbit, but don't overwhelm them, because they're going to either get angry or just leave.
Yes, it has happened before. Do you talk to your children? Are they open to it somehow? I'm just curious to know.
So my daughter is probably a far more ancient soul than I am. So it's really easy with her. In fact, I think she's way beyond me. And she really is. But my son has a ways to go. So I kind of have to dance around it with my son. I don't hide who I am, or the book that I wrote, or the books that I'm writing, or what I post on my website or social media or anything. But, no, I think we just probably talk more about kind of the here and now. Like, how's work going? And did you go fishing last Saturday? And did you catch anything? That kind of thing. So, but I trust that the day will come where he might open the door. And so and again, I have screwed this up many times, Valeria.
Yes. Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Tell me about it, John.
So I'm learning
Oh,
to listen to
yes.
my intuition rather than just open my mouth.
Yes, yes, that's a big one. I mean,
Yeah.
it's called wisdom for a reason,
Yeah.
right?
It's
Being
there. We
quiet.
just have to check in with it,
So is that a coincidence that your daughter is more open and you feel like that it's more, let's say, evolved than your son, or this is a female male female thing? The gender even gets in the way. The
I
embodied gender.
yeah, I don't know. I knew before I even started to awaken, you might say, back when I was a normal person.
Yeah, yeah.
I knew there was
Oh.
something special about her because little things would happen. Like she'd be like 6 years old and riding the school bus and say, "Hey, Daddy, you know how every day the school bus comes to the end of our street and it turns around this way? Well, today on the way home, I was thinking, wouldn't it be interesting if it went this way?" And it
Mm,
did. And
mm,
I said, "Wow, I
right.
think you're psychic." She goes, "Nope, I just know things." So there were
Yes.
little signs of
Yeah,
it. And,
yeah.
but she kind of, I don't know, she kind of, I almost don't like the term awaken, but she started awakening at a really young age. And it was probably around 18 or 19. And I don't think that's how it is for most people. If they're destined to wake up at all, it's usually midlife, 30s, 40s, 50s. And so, and I met a Russian woman who's unusually awake and unusually dialed in. And she just said, "Oh, John, you're an old soul, but your daughter's an ancient soul."
Oh,
So I was like, okay, my daughter's got about a thousand
yeah.
lifetimes more than me. So, but it's been great in a
Uh,
way. So
yes.
we can very open mindedly and open heartedly talk
Mm,
about anything.
yes. That sounds wonderful to me. Wow, I'm not a mother, but having this experience, so that's another interesting experience to have to share, right, with
Yeah.
somebody very close to you.
Yeah.
That spiritual knowledge.
Yeah.
Wow. And then we're almost at the end, but I
Okay.
do want to also tap a little bit more into the topic of balance between the masculine and the feminine qualities.
Yeah. Yeah.
So talk to me about that and how do we get to do that and what does it look like again? That same question.
Well, what it looks like for me was I was way overly developed on the masculine side. So even to this day, I think I'm learning to do the things that are probably quite natural for you, like being in that state of timelessness and flow.
Yeah, and being
It's
late
still,
all the time, right? Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
I was
Oh my God,
very
John.
structured and very time bound. But I was, CEO of a company, and I've been literally in management of one kind or another since the age of 18. And so from 18 to 60, all I did was um, put chaos into order and boss people around and tell them what to do. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but it was a very structured masculine life. And so I'm learning all of the counterparts. If we think of masculine as action and feminine as stillness, if we think of masculine as talking and feminine as listening, logic might be masculine, but intuition might be feminine. Feeling rather than thinking. I mean, there's a long list of opposites that we generally attribute to masculine and the opposite to feminine. And then as far as the earth itself, a lot of people have talked about this, that the earth for thousands of years has been too masculine, the patriarchy, the masculine, and it's all changing. My understanding is this is where earth wants all of its inhabitants to go, is to a nice balance between masculine and feminine. We're not going to go from all masculine to all feminine. We're here to bring what I would call a mature balance between the two. And so that's my understanding, because there's awesome benefits to both. And so, but I think most people come in kind of one-sided and are spending their life trying to learn the opposite of what's natural for them.
Yes, true. I love that
Yeah.
way you said that. Actually, I interviewed somebody about mature masculinity. So
Yeah.
you said a mature balance between the feminine and the masculine.
Yeah.
That's an interesting idea. That would be an interesting title of a book as well. Wow. So I'm curious to know what would that look like, societies? How would we collectively kind of work together? How I'm trying to picture to visualize
What would that look like? since it's the very, very, like one of the last few pages of my book, that was my conclusion based on my experience, is that a mature balance between masculine and feminine, not all masculine, but a nice balance. So let me give an example, a few examples of what I would call the immature masculine, out of control: arrogance, competitive, war, violence, judgment. And so we've seen all that in spades. But what would the mature masculine look like? Instead, it would be support, patience, cooperation, and responsibility. And so the immature feminine might look like this: manipulate, scarcity, victimhood, do it for me. And so the mature feminine would be about love, connection, wisdom, and pleasure, interestingly enough. And so we've also probably even experienced it ourselves, where we've been arrogant or judgmental or manipulative, or there's never enough, or we play the victim. And so these are the things that I think, as a society, I hope and believe we're starting to outgrow. And
what a beautiful vision. Yeah.
That's my vision. So
yeah, it's truly
whether
beautiful.
it can happen in this lifetime or 100 lifetimes, I don't know yet.
Right. But you can see that, you can actually describe that vision. I love that. I actually would love to have that on the podcast as an introduction, but I'll leave that aside for now. Thank you so much, John, for being you. It's such a beautiful thing. I mean, I can't find another one. It's beautiful to see human beings getting to know themselves deeply and kind of awakening for their true nature, the essence, which is here and there and everywhere. And that, life would look so much different, as you described, even without thinking about the opposites, but thinking just from spiritual knowledge alone, knowing that we are interconnected, that the essence, the foundation of this reality is one. So that would change everything. That's what it keeps coming back to me as a message. What's there, it's here, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
How could I hurt anyone? Thank you so much, John, again, for this conversation, for what you're doing, for your presence in our shared reality, relative reality. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the invitation.
And before we say goodbye for today, I would like to ask you a final question and then a technical one. What 3 experiences you wish everyone to have before they lose the body, before they die?
Wow. Let's see. 3 experiences I wish everybody would have. So first off, I would say some sort of transpersonal, transrational, you might call it spiritual experience, where they just get a glimpse of something greater. And there's a little quote from the poet Rilke, and there's a little snippet of it. It goes, "Some evening, step out of your house, which you know so well. Enormous space is near." And I think we tend to wall ourselves in with our beliefs, our opinions, our judgments, our identities. And so what I would like is for a little crack in that wall. I like to describe it, we build a house made of bricks, and to start taking some of the bricks out. And
I love
it's
that.
a good thing.
Yes.
So that would probably be the main one right there. Just, I would call it a glimpse of more. And let's see, 3 experiences. I think that would probably be the main one.
Yeah, that's 1 in 3, right? Just, You see, that's how I tend to think, right, about having that glimpse, right, of the absolute reality, right? That'll be it. Yes. What a beautiful vision. Another one. Thank you so much again. And before we say goodbye, where can we find more information about you and your books and your work and your gatherings?
Yeah. My website is johndavidlatta.com. My last name is spelled Latta, johndavidlatta.com. I have information about classes and workshops, and a blog with a lot of interesting short stories. And then my book, The Synchronicity of Love, Stories That Heal, Transform, and Awaken, 119 short, true or mostly true stories. And I wrote it that way on purpose because I like to read short stories before I go to sleep at night. It's a perfect book to just read a few short stories. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and I found out recently Target and Walmart.
How wonderful. I'll have the link the Amazon link, of course, of the
Okay.
book and your website too on your on the podcast notes. Thank you so much again, John, for your presence, and we'll talk soon. Bye for now.
Thank you, Valeria.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about John David Latta and his work, please visit johndavidlatta.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.